Welcome to Expert Profiles Atlanta, where Atlanta's influencers and innovators share strategies for overcoming obstacles and achieving success in business and life. Here's your host, best-selling author and Atlanta influencer, Neil Howe.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is your host, Neil Howe, and today my special guest is Tracie Klinke. She is the owner of Klinke Immigration, LLC in Marietta, Georgia, and she's going to talk to us today about some of the immigration news and issues that people are having in Georgia and the rest of the country as well. So welcome to the show, Tracie.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and Klinke Immigration and what kind of clients that you're helping right there.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, never a dull moment in immigration law for sure right now, especially. So we're a small firm. There's 4 of us who work here, 2 attorneys, 2 support staff. And we focus primarily on family-based immigration and humanitarian-based immigration. So what does that mean? What does that look like? For humanitarian, we do a lot of work with asylum seekers, immigrant victims of domestic violence, other violent crimes. We do work with Daca recipients, so the young adults who came into the U.S. as children without documentation. And then on the family-based side, we help people become U.S. citizens, so the naturalization process. We help a lot of newlywed couples of mixed immigration status, so 1 foreign national, 1 U.S. citizen. We help them attain their green card so that they can live together here in the U.S. We also help families reunite, so bringing parents over from overseas to come and live with their U.S. citizen adult children and things like that. So it's really rewarding work to help people out in somewhat difficult circumstances.
Yes, and there's a lot of people that are in those circumstances. We are a country that has many immigrants, myself included, as you can hear my accent, went through the process of getting married here and getting my green card and everything as well. And it's definitely very nice to be able to have. So what would you say is the number one thing that you deal with in your office, and what kind of problems do they have?
So I think the most common type of case that we see are families, couples who have been together for 2 years or sometimes 20 years, and they're looking for ways to stabilize one of the partner's status. In some cases, it's relatively straightforward. The person entered lawfully and they have no criminal history. They can apply for a green card without too much pain. Of course, government fees, I think, can be a bit painful, currently close to $1,800 for a green card just for the government.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also have couples where they've been together a long time and the person may not have entered the U.S. legally, or they may have multiple illegal entries to the United States for a variety of reasons. If they have more than one unlawful entry, though, there's no way for them to get in line to get status. And those are heartbreaking consultations because they're at the point where they want to get things fixed. But really, the only way to do it is for them to return home for 10 years without any chance of reunification in the United States. For most families, that's not really an option. If the person only entered unlawfully once, then perhaps they might qualify for a waiver of forgiveness from the U.S. government, but then they have to show that their U.S. citizen spouse is going to suffer extreme hardship if they couldn't stay here in the country. And that's getting harder and harder by the day, because how do you define extreme hardship? That seems pretty vague. You would think any time a family is separated, you're going to have hardship, but the government says no. What makes your case different than any other of the other families that we tear apart? What makes your case unique? And that's really difficult for families to go through and to think about those worst case scenarios. If they lost, the father of the family, if they lost their wife, what happens? So those are really difficult conversations.
No, definitely. I mean, tearing a family apart in any situation is always going to be a bad thing and cause hardship. But to send them, hundreds and thousands of miles away is, just there's the financial issue, there's emotional issues is there.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
It's very, very hard to give that news, I'm sure.
Mhm.
So, talking about news, one that was in the news very recently, on Facebook at least, was a case where somebody had been here for 38 years and got sent back home to Jordan. Is that something that we're seeing more and more often now?
We are. And it's not that more and more people are becoming deportable or removable from the United States. It's that we've lost the heart and the discretion in our immigration enforcement capacities. So this Jordanian who'd been here for 38 years had been going to a check-in, kind of like immigration probation. He'd report, say, yes, I'm here. I'm not committing any crimes, creating any trouble. And the person was allowed to stay here, work, be with their family, and that was fine. But under the new administration, everyone's treated the same. It doesn't matter if you've been here 38 years or 38 days. If you're removable, deportable, then yes, the government is going to deport you. So really that's unfortunate, and we're seeing a lot of long-term residents, for lack of a better term, they're not lawful residents, but people who live here in the United States being forced to completely uproot their lives and go to a country that they may not even remember.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you know much about that case? I know every case is different, but, why were they not able to get legal status in 38 years?
So I think a common misconception in immigration law, and I guess I should preface, I don't know this particular case, but having said that, people talk a lot about doing it the right way and getting in line. And sometimes there really is no right way. Marriage to a U.S. citizen doesn't cure everything. Having a U.S. citizen child over the age of 21 to petition for you, that doesn't cure everything. So if this individual, let's say, entered the United States unlawfully, that's one big issue that we've talked about already. But let's say maybe that they had applied for asylum, and in Atlanta especially, asylum is extremely difficult to get. The courts here grant about 2% of the cases they hear per year. So if they were denied asylum, then they were ordered deported. Now, an order of deportation doesn't mean someone's automatically put on a plane. They can be given an order of supervision where they go and report. And I have a feeling that in his case, something like that probably happened, where he had an old order of deportation, and he was allowed to stay here and just discreetly and checking in, and there was no way for him to petition with his wife or children because he just wasn't eligible for anything. There was no line for him to get in backup. He would have been forced outside the United States for a minimum of 10 years before trying to come back again.
That's not a good solution. Talk to me about some of the changes with the current administration that are different now from the previous one.
So we've talked about one already with the change with removing discretion from enforcement. And so we are seeing people with sympathetic cases being ordered deported. This Jordanian we just spoke about, but also parents of U.S. citizen children. We've had clients who have 5 children, maybe one with major medical issues, and they were still forced to leave the United States. So that's been one big change. But also immigration, we kind of have 2 rules we follow. We have immigration law, which is through Congress. And that really hasn't changed too much in truth. Because Congress doesn't really want to touch immigration, as we've seen. But then we have immigration policy, which is set by the agencies themselves on how they interpret the law. So that's with USCIS, the people who adjudicate green card cases, naturalization, things like that. And also with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and even with Customs and Border Protection. Each one has the ability to interpret how they do their job. So one example, within USCIS, there's a special type of status for unaccompanied minor children. It's called Special Immigrant Juvenile Status. It was designed to allow children who come to the United States alone or who have a parent die while they're here. It allows that child to become a ward of the state. They get a dependency order in Georgia, placed into custody with a family member or really anyone who will take them. And then that child can file for a green card. Well, under Georgia law, the child can get a dependency order up until age 18. But immigration says, no, up until age 21, we'll accept these petitions to allow children to get their green cards. And they've been doing that for the past 10 or so years, up until the age of 21. Well, recently, immigration has changed their mind and said, no, if you're between the ages of 18 and 21, we will no longer accept these petitions for special immigrant juvenile status. So these cases that have been pending through no fault of their own, they were just, they filed between the ages of 18 and 21, they're going to be denied now because immigration has changed how they interpret the rules. They say, no, it's still special immigrant juvenile status. We haven't changed the definition. We're just changing the age, and the age isn't in the law. So I know that's a bit of a policy wonk example, but it really does have real world impact on these individuals.
Definitely. Now, explain to me what Daca is. I hear that and talked about all the time, but not quite sure what it means.
Yeah, so Daca stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Now, deferred action has existed really since the 1970s. John Lennon was the first recipient of deferred action from immigration. And what it is, it allows immigration in their discretion to allow someone to stay in the United States, to obtain work permit, and not be in fear of deportation. John Lennon had drug convictions, drug charges, and so he would have otherwise been unable to stay in the United States, but for deferred action. So I think that's kind of a fun fact. Mm-hmm. But deferred action was generally granted on an individual basis to people who were deserving. You present your case to the local immigration office, and they decide whether or not to approve it. Well, what happened in 2012 is it's the first time that we had an entire group of people declared eligible for deferred action. And so that's what President Obama announced in June 2012, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And it was for anyone who was out of status on the date of the announcement, who had been in the United States for at least 5 years, who were at least age 16, but were no older than 31 years old. So you had to meet an educational requirement, such as being enrolled in high school, have a high school diploma, or have a GED. Or there's also a military component. If you had served in the U.S. military, you were also eligible for DACA and met the other qualifications, of course. So what it did was for every 2 years, people who were eligible for DACA, they could renew a work permit and they could live in the United States without fear. And in Georgia, having a work permit allows someone to get a driver's license. Without a work permit or proof of U.S. citizenship, you're not going to get a license here. So it allowed people really to gain their independence, live their lives, and really become key members of our communities. And so DACA was never meant to be a permanent solution. DACA does not lead to a green card. It doesn't create a legal entry to the United States. So it really was just a temporary solution. And we all knew it was going to be temporary. We were hopeful that we would get something better than DACA, pass to a green card, pass to citizenship, something for these members of the DACA class. But what's happened is, of course, back in October 2017, President Trump announced the end to DACA. And they had a 6-month wind down period where they said, we'll allow people to renew their cards one last time, renew their work cards, that is, one last time, and get another 2 years. And then we hope that Congress will take action and have a permanent solution, a permanent fix to this DACA issue. Well, that 6 months ended back in March, and Congress was never able to find a solution. So there have been court challenges. And where we are now, all right, it's that people who have had DACA can continue to renew. That's fine. Even though we're past kind of this March deadline that President Trump put in place, people can still file to renew. But the problem was people who had never filed for DACA were not allowed to file initial applications. So if there was a child who met all the qualifications, but they just turned 16, they could now qualify for DACA. And there are also a lot of people who never applied for DACA because they were scared that their information was going to be used against them eventually. So people who had initial DACA applications were out of luck. But this federal court, last week, they ruled that people who had never filed for Daca but were eligible could start to apply. The government had to accept their applications, which is great news, but we're still kind of in a holding pattern because the judge gave USCIS, the office that approves or denies these cases, and gave them 90 days to come back with an argument on why they shouldn't be allowed to do initial applications. So we're cautiously optimistic that we'll get more DACA recipients soon, so that people will at least have some documentation while we wait for Congress to take action.
Yep, that seems to be something that everybody is just waiting around on and not seeing any action. How are things looking in Georgia overall? What are the main problems in Georgia, and how does it compare to other states as far as being a state that is lenient maybe to illegal immigration?
Well, from what I hear, Georgia is one of the most difficult states to live in if you don't have documentation. Getting a driver's license, for example, you have to show proof of U.S. citizenship, so passport, your U.S. birth certificate, naturalization certificate, something along those lines. Or you have to show that you're legally in the United States. And for most people, that's going to be either a green card, certain types of visas, or a work permit. So not having documentation definitely prohibits people from living life to the fullest here in Georgia, because they're not able to drive cars, and we don't have the best public transportation system in the world for certain. Right. So that's definitely limiting. And then we do have state legislation speaking about immigration. And in fact, just this past session that ended a month ago, this Georgia Senate had SB 452, which was designed really, I think, to be anti-immigrant. And the main purpose was to be a deportation pipeline. So anytime somebody's undocumented in the United States, they got caught up in the criminal justice system, be it even at the point of arrest, a judge or prosecuting attorney had to make a determination whether or not somebody was legally in the country. And immigration status is not a black or white matter. It's not usually, do you have a work permit, do you have a green card, or do you have a U.S. passport or not? There are all sorts of types of cases where people are kind of in this gray area, where they might have a case pending, like a green card application or a U visa for victims of violent crime who cooperated with the police. All they have is a receipt, and they don't have anything beyond that. So if somebody like that got caught driving without a license, or failing to stop fully at a stop sign, we were afraid that they were going to be put in deportation proceedings because they didn't have the right type of immigration document. And so we did a lot of work with a variety of community partners to educate our elected officials about this and all the unintended consequences, because truth is, immigration law is crazy complex. We had a case go up to the U.S. Supreme Court, a Georgia case, where a man had been convicted of possessing marijuana. And the courts here in Georgia said, yes, that's an aggravated felony. You are deportable. It went up on appeal, went all the way to the Supreme Court. And they said, no, it's not an aggravated felony. You're not deportable. This man gets to keep his green card. So if it takes the Supreme Court to figure out what a Georgia statute really means in terms of immigration law, I don't think it's fair to ask every judge in the state down to the magistrate level who may not have any experience with immigration law to make these determinations. But thankfully, that did not pass. But it's something that I'm sure is going to come up year after year, because our elected officials it's a big thing, right, to talk about keeping our community safe. And unfortunately, immigration has been used as kind of as a dirty word. All illegal immigrants are criminals. That's the common rhetoric, but they're not. So we kind of need to take back that conversation and talk about immigration in terms of the individual and not about these fear-mongering.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you said, it's very complex and there's no real solution in sight. So if somebody does get in trouble, what's the first thing that they should do?
Well, if they're in trouble criminally, let's say they were caught driving without a license, honestly, the best thing for them to do is to work with a good criminal defense attorney and get the charges dropped, get them mitigated to a point where they don't impact immigration. And that's the first thing. People generally call an immigration attorney first, which is nice, but it's not helpful because they've got to take care of the charges first. How a person is charged, how they're convicted, if they're convicted, that's what an immigration attorney needs to know. And we don't have control over that. Not every immigration attorney practices criminal law. In fact, most of us don't. But there's a kind of a niche of attorneys that do what we call crimmigration. So that intersection of criminal law and immigration. And we have a great bar of criminal defense attorneys who understand the immigration consequences of certain pleas or convictions and can work with someone to lessen that harm. But once that's taken care of, if the person is indeed in the United States without status, ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, will be notified. And if they place a detainer, so a hold on the individual, ICE has 48 hours from the end of the case or when bond is posted. They have 48 hours to come and pick up the individual from state custody and then decide whether or not to detain them for immigration proceedings. And that's the time where you'd want to speak with an immigration attorney.
So talk to me about some of the fears. It's very emotional, I'm sure, in your office talking to some of these people with problems. What are they most afraid that's going to happen?
Well, I think for the most part, we see two types of fear. We see fear from people who are in status, have a great case pending, something like that, and they're just panicked because they're hearing hateful rhetoric from people in high positions. They're hearing rumors. And so it's a lot of hand-holding right now, telling people in those situations, no, that's not your case, that's not happening, you're fine, please just try to rest easy. But then we have families who absolutely have every right, every need to have panic in their lives because they don't know if that next trip to school or to the doctor, if that's going to be the last time that they'll see their family, because they could be picked up. And so I think the fear is really the unknown in both circumstances. We're seeing people who just don't know what to expect from our government because the rules, the policies, everything seems to be changing almost on a daily basis. And it's hard to live your life when you don't know what the rules are.
That is certainly true. So what myths are there out there or misconceptions about immigration right now?
I think there are a few. I mean, I'm sure if we had another half hour, I could tell you a lot more. But I think one of the biggest myths is that it's easy to get status. It's not. You have to have a family member or an employer sponsor you. You have to have essentially a clean record, never been to the United States undocumented, never overstayed a visa. So there really is no way for people to just wake up one day and say, I want to come to the United States, get my green card, and open a business. There's not. And that's unfortunate. There's also the misconception that anyone who entered the United States unlawfully is a criminal. There's two separate things. An immigration violation, crossing the border illegally once, that's not a crime. That's a civil violation. Just like, going 5 miles over the speed limit. You wouldn't call yourself a criminal if you got a speeding ticket like that. It's only criminal if you re-enter the United States undocumented after a deportation order. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that these are people generally, there's always exceptions, like there is in any population, but these are people who generally just want to come to the United States, earn some money, keep their families safe, and live their life quietly. They're not looking to traffic drugs, traffic people, or weapons. Again, certainly I know that there is that fear and that there are cases of that, but the border's not overflowing with people who want to do us harm. It's overflowing right now. We talk about this caravan. These are women and children who are fleeing horrible violence in their home countries. children being raped, being conscripted into gangs. And what parent wouldn't do whatever they could to escape and protect their families? So that's the type of person that's coming into the United States right now. That's the type of person who needs help, who needs our help. And it's a sad day when we summarily say that they're all criminals and they have no claims. It's pretty disheartening.
So where can we draw the line between, I know Trump's rhetoric is, a nation without borders isn't a nation, and, reaching out to help those people in need. Is there a balance? Is there a solution, or is this what we're fighting for?
I think it's what we're fighting for. The way to apply for asylum in the United States is to either enter with a visa or to come to the border and ask for asylum. That's it. So you can't be in your home country, let's say Honduras, go to the U.S. Embassy and say, I'd like asylum in the United States, please. There's no function for that. So we need to make sure that everybody understands the law, and that includes our government officials who are at the border, who should be interviewing and making individual case analysis on whether these people have individual true fear to return to their home countries. So I feel like on the ground, when I work with immigration officers in a variety of agencies individually, they all want to do the right thing. They want to do their job. They want to do it well. They want to hear the immigrant story. But at the upper levels, when we hear stories of Department of Homeland Security secretaries saying, oh, these people coming to the U.S. in the caravan should be criminally prosecuted, well, that doesn't help. It doesn't help anyone who's trying to do their job in her agency, I think, because she's really kind of pre-gamed and pre-adjudicated these cases before hearing them. And immigration is not a blanket situation. It's truly case by case.
So, Tracie, if there's one common mistake or pitfall that you see a lot of people make when it comes to, trying to get legal status, what would you say that is?
I would say not everybody needs an attorney. That's absolutely true. I get that. There's more than enough work to go around without everyone hiring an attorney. But what really hurts the community is when people hire notarios, people who don't have a law degree, who say that they're filling out forms only, not providing legal advice. But we've had clients spend $10,000 or more filing applications that they weren't eligible for. But this shady notario said, oh, I can get you a work card. Let's file for you to get asylum. But that eventually will lead to deportation. They just don't mention that. Or the notario files cases incorrectly, so there's bad information, and then suddenly there's inconsistencies in the record, and immigration thinks a person's committed fraud. So I think getting the wrong kind of help is definitely hurtful. And it's not even just notarios. I mean, it can be people with the best of intentions, like people at church, friends who may have gone through the process before. But if you're going to seek advice, I would say definitely seek it from a licensed attorney, hopefully someone who specializes in immigration, because it is so crazy complicated. Because you want to make sure you rely on the best advice and not based on what somebody did 20 years ago and may have worked in a very different situation.
Well, that certainly is very good advice there. Now, could you give us an example of how you've helped one of your clients? What kind of case was it that sticks out in your mind here? What problems did they have? How were you able to help solve those problems? And ultimately, what was the outcome for them?
Sure. A case that we recently got approved after working on for 5 years is what comes to mind first. She's a citizen of Mexico, and she had married a U.S. citizen, young couple in their 20s. And I remember this because it was her birthday. She came in, we were going to do a simple green card case. It looked like she entered lawfully. She had a U.S. citizen spouse to petition for her. Everything looked great. But she had some old paperwork on her, and we looked through it, and she had an A number, an alien number, which is how immigration tracks people because names change. And we found out that she had an old deportation order from when she was 5 years old. And it was through no fault of her own. It was a situation with her mom, who had married a U.S. citizen, but that U.S. citizen unfortunately died while their case was being processed. So there was no way for them to legally stay here in the United States, and a judge ordered them deported. But my client, she didn't know that. So here we are, 20 years later, and I'm telling her on her birthday she had a deportation order, and the tears were intense. So we thought about how we could fix it. So we filed the family petition and got that approved. Then we went back to court and explained the set of circumstances, and thankfully it was in a kinder era, and the judge reopened her deportation case, only hers, not her mom's, reopened the case and terminated it. So that deportation order was no longer an issue. So then her green card actually had to be adjudicated at the local immigration office. Well, somewhere between the court and the immigration office, and they're about 7 miles away from each other, but somehow in those 7 miles, her file got lost. It was sent to Archives, which is a salt mine outside of Kansas City. It took us 2 years to get her case back to where it needed to be. We talked to every level of supervisor we could think of to get attention on her case, and I understand they have 17,000 files in Atlanta alone. It's hard to get a case back on track once it falls off track. So we waited 2 years. We went to an interview, and some documents were missing or outdated, and we didn't realize that. And so we had to get a new medical exam, updated taxes, and finally, nearly 5 years later, just last week, she was approved for her green card. She can live in the United States finally without fear of being deported. She can work. She can raise her U.S. citizen children. She can be with her husband. And it took a lot of elbow grease to work that case through, but it did. So we took her from despair to hopefully joy with that news.
Excellent. Now, I went through a long process myself, so I understand what it's like to wait around and not know, and nothing really happens fast with immigration either. It's always a waiting period. So, but it is relief. It is relief when you finally get it. So, tell us, Tracie, what made you want to become an immigration attorney? I can definitely hear the passion you have for each of these individual stories, but what was it that really drew you to the immigration field?
Well, thank you. I love what I do, that's for sure. I don't know exactly what it was. In college at the University of Kansas, I worked in the International Student Office, and I loved it. One of the best compliments ever was that a student called me an international American. I thought that was great. But then after that, I have a former stepfather who's from Mexico, and so he went through that process when I was growing up. I have a little sister adopted from Russia. Again, I wasn't involved in any of that, but immigration's been part of my family thread, even though I'm just a girl from Kansas. And then I taught English overseas for a while, and I think being abroad helped me see the difficulties of being a stranger in a strange land. And if I had to navigate the Polish immigration system, I would have been lost. And so having someone to walk you through the system just seemed like a really great thing to do. And then when I married my now ex-husband, who's German, we went through the process together to get him a green card. And I thought, aha, I can do this. I can help take a lot of the intimidation and fear out of this, because when you do this day in and day out as an attorney, it does become easier. And I remember what that fear was like, looking at the forms for the first time, going, oh my goodness, do I say yes or no? And full name, do I include my middle name or just initial? And you worry that one little thing wrong is going to totally destroy a case.
Well, it's definitely a lot simpler when you have somebody that knows the system and knows how to put these cases through that are going to pass, rather than trying to do it yourself. So one piece of advice, if somebody's looking for an immigration attorney in Atlanta, what's the one thing that they should be looking for? What kind of questions should they be asking?
Well, I think the best thing is to get a referral from a friend who's been happy with their attorney. I think they'll always give you the honest truth. But if you don't have someone in your network who's dealt with immigration before, look for someone who is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. That means that they're getting constant updates about what's going on in immigration, and they're part of a professional organization dedicated to immigration. But then also make sure that who you work with, that immigration isn't just 1 out of 20 things that they do. You want to make sure that somebody really focuses in on this area, maybe 1 or 2 other areas of law, but really with the complexity of immigration law, you want a specialist.
Again, that is great advice, Tracie. We're talking with Tracie Klinke here. She is the owner of Klinke Immigration, LLC. If people want to get in touch with you, Tracie, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So we've got our website up, and you can find out all about us and even schedule a consultation that way. It's www.klinke, Klinke, immigration.com. And our telephone number is 678-713-4255.
Excellent, Tracie. Well, I have enjoyed talking with you today. Thank you for all the information that you have given us. It's a very complex system. Each case is an individual case, and that is something that's very hard for many people to understand. There's a blanket view of what immigration is in the country, I think, but unless you're really involved with it or have gone through it, you don't really understand that it is a case-by-case basis, and people have to make decisions, and it definitely helps to have somebody on your side.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about all this the fun world of immigration.
Well, thanks for being my guest in Expert Profiles Atlanta. And to our listening audience, if you like what you hear, hit that like button and share, and we'll see you next time on the show.
Thank you for listening to Expert Profiles Atlanta with Neil Howe. To learn more about the resources in the show or to listen to past episodes, visit expertprofilesatlanta.com.